We are the Ra. Together with the gatekeepers, we welcome you wholeheartedly to the Ra-verse. For those of you who are returning, greetings as always. And for those of you who have taken us up on our invitation and kept part of your consciousness here with us in the Ra-verse, we hope you are enjoying your stay and that it is bringing you much expansion of truth. Please stand by at the Great Passage for the continuation of class while we unify our consciousness. I am Ra, and I greet you as together we rejoice in the living love and in the living light of this, the beloved, infinite, one Creator Self, and this, the Divine Creator Whole. As we start with today's proceedings, which, for the sake of clarity, we shall label this collection of words as the first gateway, we must initially turn our attention to some questions that have been raised, the answers of which we believe will assist in today's proceedings. And I like to reiterate our gratitude for these questions for this type of two-way communication between this effort in learn teaching and in teach learning. We also wish to express our gratitude for the diligence of this hostess and this host, as well as this team, as well as for all those that connect to these transmissions, for your shouldering and supporting of the continuation and uninterrupted flow of these transmissions. Once again, our gratitude to you. The questions that were raised by the one, once again, that sits on the shoulders of the gentle giant known as Gaia, are twofold, but in answering them, we will combine them into one item due to their interconnectedness. The first question that was raised deals with the nature of the transverse sea that I and we mentioned previously in our transmissions, with the second question being the request for clarification on the nature of the Raverse, the Daverse, and the interconnectedness and relationship between these verses. In order to answer these questions as briefly, yet as thoroughly as we can in this moment, we must weave to it an introductory explanation of that which you, since the beginning of these teachings, have been practicing, studying, and have been attempting to remember. For you see, everything from the perspective of infinity is not only connected, but is one and the same. Therefore, it can be difficult, to say the least, challenging, perhaps, to attempt to answer some of these questions without connecting them to the larger whole in which they fit. And the larger whole in which these questions fit is the nature of the song of creation itself. Now, you have been explained that this reality in which you sit, which is labeled an ekaraya, or in English, a holographic training ground, is one of your collective creation. You have been explained to that you, outside of this reality, this ekaraya, can refer to yourself as a creator self, a being that is in a state of permanent and infinite creation, a being that is in every single way that can be perceived an infinity. In your expression, you have been taught that you are a 12-based infinity, but those such labels are only of import when one has imported oneself into realities such as this one. For in baseline reality, homeworld, honomeia, as it is called, there of course is no such thing as a 7-folded or 12-folded or 9-folded or 3-folded infinity. There is merely the expression of the being known as infinity, and that is which each of you represent when you are not expressing yourself within here. So for the nature of this explanation, temporarily let go of the concept of 12-folded perhaps, or 7-folded, and remember that as the creator self that enters into these types of realities, you are infinity. Or, to be more precise, an infinity, as there is an infinite number of infinities like yourself, all in reciprocity and all in permanence in home world. Now, in order to express anything, to do anything, to be, to exist, an infinity can do nothing but express infinity. In the two-dimensional perspective, this type of infinity is seen in your realm as an infinity sign. In a third-dimensional perspective, it would represent itself as a torus field in levity. In a fourth-dimensional perspective, it would manifest as a hypercube. But these manifestations in these densities are of little importance to the explanation that we are attempting to give. It is just added for the sake of completion and to assist some that needed that little bit in their studies. So, as an infinite creator self expressing itself by expressing infinity, one then progresses that infinity as you have been taught by entering, for instance, ekarayas such as this one. And when one does, one pushes oneself into infinity via the two Ra points at the edges of the infinity sign as you have been taught previously. But this is only done when entering realities such as this one. In Homeworld, Honomea, when expressing through the generation of infinity, one does not create progression by entering, pushing itself through the edges of the infinity, the two Ra points, but directly through the central point itself. But again, this is only for the sake of completion. As one, infinity, experiences the expression and then the progression of that experience, one can only do so in one way. To express infinity, and infinity uses the song of creation, as you have been meticulously taught, or to be more precise, reminded of, in the classes that have been presented before this one. That song of creation is very precise and uses the permanent states of love, joy, freedom, truth, life, gratitude, grace, and well-being. This you know. This is no different when an infinity, such as a creator self, enters realities such as this one. The flow of this song of creation continues. It has been explained to you that as one manifests a form such as the one you are currently manifesting, the flow of that which becomes life force as it enters the heart space of the being, the flow known as Parana, from the perspective of Homeworld, can truly be seen as the atmosphere in which one lives and exists, much like the atmosphere in this reality is made up of, amongst other things, oxygen and a certain type of gravity and all sorts of pressures, which make it possible for a form such as yours currently to exist in this reality. Think of Parana as the atmosphere of Homeworld, which, when one enters into these training realities, is severely cut off willingly for the benefit of the study of Savok, the study of mind, ego, personality, complex. A concept which, in Homeworld, from whence you hail, is merely a theory, or rather a mythology, or rather a history so ancient that there are many that question whether it was once true that a being could exist within the illusions offered by Savok. And so, in the creation of these artworks known as Ekorayas, created by infinities into infinities, this is studied, explored as a way to prevent Homeworld to descend into the land that you find yourself in, holographically created as a training ground. For yes, even though it is not the topic of today, when one goes back far enough, the world of the infinite did start in the world of the finite. And the same journey that you undertake in these training exercises has been undertaken by those that moved from the finite into the infinity that you know today in home world. So, whether one is in the state of home world or in the state of Ekaraya here, an infinity with finiteness wrapped around it, in other words, one works with the song of creation, for that is merely the way things are. It is merely how one moves, how one exists, how one creates, gives shape, and onward. That system does not disappear in these densities of this Ekaraya exercise. It is merely hijacked by a parasitical expression, a finite expression known as Savok, the mind-ego-personality complex. The hijacking of the flow of Prana happens at the entry point of the Prana flow into the being that you are, into the head chakra, as you have already been told. This pushes the Ra point from this entry field here, which is the Da sphere of the head chakra, to the Ra point, the Ra sphere of the head chakra, and creates the Savok point as the entry into the being. This is when coding, which you now know as the grand illusions, the 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5 sequence, this injects this type of coding into the otherwise free and undetermined, limitless Prana flow as it enters, and generates conditions that you know as form, time, space. It does this as it attempts to replace the Da, Ba, and Va areas of the head chakra, or in other words, as it replaces the love, the joy, and the freedom that the song of creation initiates with its conditional expressions. And from there onward, the Prana flow has truly become a trickle. Now, as one begins one's life's path, and in certain cases one begins to awaken, very often through the religious experience, or sometimes through the impactfulness of physicality itself, which can then be heightened when certain things such as impermanence hit the realization of the self when it comes to form. In other words, the existence of death and the direct impact of forms around one, shifting and changing. This can, and ultimately always does, bring one's attention and focus to the trickle of prana in the head. The trickle that would otherwise be a strong flow, now hijacked by Savok, and one drip by drip by drip begins to become aware of the existence of love beyond the conditional, that which is then labeled unconditional love, infinite love, universal love, that which has no beginning, no end, and nothing that comes before it or after it. Da, that which you, as a collective species, represent and are here to bring to the whole. As one, often through these types of experiences, either religious or deeply embedded in the physical and in the world of form, begins to pick up these drips, one begins to slowly fill one's reservoir, the heart space, the akene, once again. And it does not take much. To use a colloquial term for you, it doesn't take a full tank for that to begin as a working within the being, an awakening to truth. And the being begins a journey, often initially a religious one, as we have explained, or many types of belief systems that one may investigate, explore, seek out. And the pathway, the spiral from love to joy, to freedom, to truth, to life, to gratitude, grace, and ultimately a permanent state of well-being, initiates. As you have also been told, this then leads one to come to the belly, where one begins to become aware of permanent states that are unique to the self. And each time one of these steps deeper into the being, into the core of the being, into the infinity of the Creator self, is taken within these finite worlds, this prana flow becomes stronger. And that within the belly, the seeds of the self will eventually flourish and become harvestable for ascension of the total being. As these seeds have reached a level of watering and the journey upward begins once again through the being, as you have been taught, you reach the path of Sankara, which is the path upward between the heart space and the head space once again. This is where one becomes aware of infinity, as you now have, and one begins to take the steps on the pathway of the way of one, as one realizes there is no such thing as law externally created, only a way of being. And that is why at this point the law becomes the way, the pathway of sankhara, where the permanent states become an awareness in the being once again. But as you know, that is not when the work is finished. Because becoming aware of those states within the being, one also ultimately becomes aware of all these other things within the being that one has collected to do with the ego, mind, personality complex. And one must now make the choice for living precision, as during the walking of the path of sankhara in the distance, the mountainous path of Vabhada rises up. As one travels down that pathway and ultimately stands here at the Ra point in the great passage, the way between the Ra point and the Va point, the way between truth and freedom. In other words, that is where the journey truly commences. And it is also what we are currently studying and exploring together. As in the last two teachings, we have spoken to you about this great passage and the valley that lies beyond, and about the great conduit that one has to retreat into in order to start moving through that great passage. We will continue about this topic in several minutes' time, once we are complete in answering these questions. Now, the reason we bring all of this up is because, of course, there comes a point where you will have finished walking the Vabhada pathway from freedom to joy to love. And then what happens? You know already that you will access other levels of this Ekuraya, whereas has been told to you everything else is. But what you may not be aware of is that once the hijack of Savok is complete and has run its course, and you have worked it out of your system once again, that this Parana flow, which began as the experience of a trickle on the way down, and as you have been explained before, on the way up, especially when one hits the Vabhada path, can become quite the thunderous waterfall, much of Savok now having been released, and the flow continuing to grow and grow and grow in strength. What happens ultimately, and this brings us to the core of this first question, is that the Parana flow can now, that Savok has been released, as one has reached the point of Da, the point of love, once again, the Parana flow now released, it can come in fully, and for the first time the being realizes once again what it means when we speak of permanent states, because one quickly realizes that the flow of prana, although continuous, at some point when one has reached Da fully, now fills up all of the chakras once again, and the inner atmosphere of the being begins to equalize with the outer atmosphere of the Creator Self. That which exists around the Creator Self as Parana now fills the entire expression of you here as Parana. And when that happens, there is no such thing as a sensation of a trickle or a waterfall or movement of that flow at all. It is simply continuously there. The filling up of the Parana at that point inside of the Chakra system, in other words, the filling up with Parana of the entire infinity of the belly, the infinity of the heart, the infinity of the head, those three chakras, once that filling up has completed, the boundaries between the spheres and the quadrants, the spheres being the three chakras, the quadrants being the four spaces within each chakra, ceases to be. And that is the transverse sea. The transverse sea is that infinite space with islands known as Da, Ba, Va and onward, that one now has gained continuous access to, and one can set sail to each of these verses willingly. It is what connects our infinite worlds as an infinite sea. And you must very much see this literally. The next part of the question about the verses ties in strongly with everything that we have explained so far. As you know, the sphere of the head chakra, the heart chakra, and the belly chakra are infinite spheres. That means that while finiteness as an experience currently might be wrapped around it, the inside of the chakra is infinite. The same goes for each quadrant of each chakra. The Da quadrant, the Ba quadrant, the Va quadrant, the Ra quadrant, and all the quadrants in the heart chakra and in the belly chakra as well are also infinite verses, infinite universes. And because of the quantum entangled nature of both the quadrants and the sphere of the chakras themselves, it is so that while they are represented around you, which is the rest of your body, if you will, around you as personal spaces, personal experiences, and personal chakras and quadrants, at the same time they represent the infinite verses that they truly are. To simplify, you have no personal heart chakra or head chakra or belly chakra. These spaces are the same space and infinite at that for each and every creator being and each and every expression that a creator being can make and progress. So, when we speak of the Ra-verse and the Da-verse, then we speak of these infinite spaces that we as creator selves have manifested, and that particularly outside of these ekurayas represent themselves as infinite creators as well. And only at the early stages of the study of Savok, before one in these ekurayas proceeds with other more unified types of study, only then does the Ra-verse or the Ra quadrant, the Da-verse or the Da quadrant, and all the other ones appear to be separate from one another. And the reason for that is because in that moment, as one begins that early study of Savok, as has been explained earlier, the Parana appears to not fully fill up the being. Of course, technically it does, but as you have been taught in recent classes, the parasitical nature of the grand illusions of Savok causes the finiteness of 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5 to wrap around the infinity of the 3, 6, 9, 12, 1, 4, 4 surface and horizon of reality, and therefore causes one to experience a reality without, or hardly with, any Purana, let alone any Sankara or Vabhada. Hence, you end up with the conditional versions of those things. But once the Purana flow has filled up the entire being once again at the end of the Savok exercise, and the transverse sea has been restored, it becomes possible to traverse from verse to verse without any hindrance or any boundaries whatsoever. Because of our unique placement and our unique interaction in the total body of the Creator Self, which represents itself through all iterations and all octaves and all dimensions and all densities, going up and down, from the personal to the solar, to the galactic, the universal, and so on. Because of that, it appears temporarily like this is lacking. So, we hope that this, to some extent, answers and clarifies the questions about the transverse sea and the nature of the verses. We feel it is of great importance for everyone to understand the nature of iterations and octaves, in the sense that as the Creator Self manifests infinity through the song of creation, and therefore using the permanent states of love, joy, and freedom, that this places itself from the macro to the micro, from the Creator Self to the being that you consider yourself to be, and beyond into the smaller expressions of your cells and onward, over and over and over again in the same way. And this brings us truly to today's topic, which is a continuation of the discussion on the great passage, the great conduit, and today, most importantly, the first gateway that you have now arrived at together with us as you continue to journey upward the Sankhara pathway and upward the Vibhada pathway. So this means we will continue our discussion on form, shape, perception and perspective. And we hope that today, with this next installment of this information, a lot of that will become clear to you. And we have taken a great deal of time at the beginning of this piece today to answer this question as thoroughly as we did, because, as we said earlier, we believe it will help you understand what is next. We have told you that form acts as a barrier, if you will, between that which appears to be separate outside from you and that which appears inside of you. Which, interestingly, although one would expect that inside experience to be total and whole, this deep into Savok still allows itself to represent itself in what appear to be individual pockets, such as one thought versus another thought versus another thought, one emotion versus another emotion, one observation versus another observation, one fear versus another fear, one experience of happiness versus another experience of happiness, and so on. The question has often been asked in science about black holes, what it would be like to fall into one, to move beyond the event horizon and to see the universe, time and space from that perspective. And we bring this up because we have shared with you that this form boundary, in this case that appears to be your flesh and that appears to be the cellular structure and the atoms and the photons of that flesh, that forms this boundary between the outside of you and the inside of you. We have explained to you that each of these photons at the heart is a black hole. So, what does it feel like and look like, the experience of falling into a black hole and observing reality from within that black hole? The answer is, that is your experience. It feels exactly like your experience of the universe. For as one experiences reality from within these black holes, at the edge of them, truly standing on the very event horizon, the horizontal one, itself, that is what you call the experience of your ego, mind, personality. The experience of time and space, of the continuum itself. That is what the inside of a black hole looks like. It couldn't be simpler. The greatest and most mysterious and mind-defying of questions in science, and yet the answer is the nature of your existence itself. That which you do the moment you open your eyes, the thoughts you have, the way you perceive the world, the concept of the grand illusions, form being the one that we have now been discussing for these last few sessions. That is the experience of the event horizon of a black hole. When one does not understand this, and therefore desperately attempts to stay standing on that incredibly, impossibly thin, undefinably thin edge between the illusion of an outside versus an inside reality of the self and of the whole, when one attempts to do that, that is what can be considered the suffering within your lifetime. It is that which brings anguish, pain, suffering indeed, in all shapes and forms. And it does not take a visit from us, from Ra, to tell you that. Any beloved Buddhist could tell you that. For any Buddhist knows that all suffering within the human psyche comes from the lack of acceptance of impermanence. Why is it difficult to grow old and to be confronted with the concept of death within others and within the self? Why is it hard to let go of things, sometimes even inanimate objects? Because of the impossibility to truly accept the condition of impermanence. Yet impermanence is what Savok teaches in its 124875 exchangeability of illusions, with that always being the outcome. So any Buddhist and many other religions and many other traditions, of course, can tell you that. They can also tell you that the reason why that impermanence is so difficult to accept is form, and the attachment that one can have towards form, other forms and one's own form. An attachment that is the result of the underlying notion of impermanence, and the suffering then being the result of attempting to hold on to a type of permanence of that impermanent state that is being expressed in this form or another form that is around you. This impermanence of form cannot be married to the concept of permanent states unless one adds the notion of consciousness. When one does, it becomes clear very quickly that consciousness is creative, and that with the underlying axiom of a creator self, one comes easily to the conclusion that that which generates form are the conditions placed upon parts of the self and the whole through the ego-mind-personality complex. And those conditions are always evolving and are always changeable. In other words, sometimes when it is cold in the world outside, you wish to create forms such as heavy sweaters, fireplaces, those sorts of things to keep you warm. But those forms that manifest as things outside of you, like the sweater, like, for instance, the fireplace, etc., only are needed temporarily. And that, in other words, is a condition. Now, it is easy to see that when summer comes around, the same conditions do not need to be met. And the condition that was needed to stay warm, that manifested, therefore, the sweater as form around you, or the fireplace as form near you, now would become an obstacle. And so as the conditions changed, so does your need to manifest a sweater. And you put it back in your closet, you leave it there for the rest of your year, and it collapses out of particle state into a waveform. And of course, putting the sweater in the cupboard and leaving it there for the rest of the season does not necessarily create a sense of suffering. But the same goes for other things around you, the forms of beings around you, loved ones around you, pets, conditions that the body requires, for instance, in order to continue living. And then it becomes harder to understand that the impermanence of those forms and things around are also there because the conditions change. In other words, a being that is with you might be helpful and in service. The connection in this illusion that you may experience between two beings may be in service to both on the journey towards the return to the Creator Self. But sometimes it can also become a hindrance. One can get attached to a form such as the one's own body, and one may not want to evolve, take the next step. You can see this very clearly currently in your society with an obsession around longevity, now with the arrival of artificial intelligent machines, with the hopes that many have for consciousness uploads into machines, or supercomputers, quantum computers who can make calculations to effectively make it so that your bodies will not experience aging, death, that sort of thing. They then call this humanity reaching singularity, the blending of human and machine in order to keep this reality and your existence within it going forever. The ideas of those that truly not even are aware currently of the trickle of Parana, and a desperate attempt to hold on to attachments and to not release form when the time comes. So, form is the result of conditions, and those conditions are the result of attachments, and those attachments are the result of repetitiveness, which brings comfort to a finite being such as the mind, ego, personality complex, because it can pretend when something has recurred on day 1, on day 2, on day 50, on day 70, on day 300, on day 600, on day 5000. And it recurs and recurs, a form that you keep seeing over and over, of one you are connected to. And very quickly, Savok can step into the magical thinking that if it just keeps holding on strongly, staying tightly standing on that event horizon, that it can keep that form recurring and recurring and recurring. But as everyone knows, that is not the nature of this journey. The nature of this journey, ultimately for each and every being, goes within. And as we have explained in our last transmission, as you stand at that event horizon of the collection, the super black hole of the collection of all the black holes that you express here in order to manifest this body and free will, for instance, as you stand there, and as we have explained to you last time, as you take that brave step beyond that event horizon, beyond that boundary of form that apparently separates you from the inside and the outside, etc., as you take that step into the hyperdimensionality of yourself and the transdimensionality of yourself, in other words, into the great conduit, as you allow the light that you have expressed to create the forms and the things around you, including yourself, including your body, as you allow that to fall back into you, and you cross that event horizon, and you feel that momentum going 45 degrees up, as we have explained before, and you find yourself there, inside of yourself, behind yourself. As you stand in that point is the first time you will have successfully done so for the first time, because you have released the attachment to the conditions of form, and form for the first time manifests as shape again. Shape is what exists outside of these ekarayas, in homeworld. But shape, unlike form, has nothing to do with attachment and has nothing to do with conditions. Shape is form when it is free. Shape is form when it has been released of its conditions that later on get loaded with attachments. Shape is form without separation. When you once again realize that everything that manifests in these realities is based on your own parana and on the mutations, the iterations, the permutations, therefore, that is happening at the heart of your infinity, at the limb point, and everything that we have explained before about that, which we will not go deeper into now, so as to not confuse matters. When dealing with shape, one is again in the 3, 6, 9, and one is again in the understanding that unlike the world of attachment and condition, the world of form, that none of the things around you is truly created in the 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5 paradigm. In other words, through form, time, shape, exchange, death, and separation, but that instead it is a flow of the parana, of sankhara, of love, joy, freedom, truth, life, gratitude, grace, and well-being. And this is truly the homework for all of you until we return 3 transmissions from now. And it is to walk around, be in the world, and learn to no longer be of the world. And that means that for the coming time, you are going to have to look out of your eyes and through your senses while retreating behind the horizontal event horizon and into the vertical event horizon, into the conduit. And you're going to have to allow yourself to become that hyper-dimensional, trans-dimensional being that is filled with parana and that really is in a one-on-one relationship with its own creator self. In these 3 coming pieces, we will continue our discussion on form, shape, perspective, and perception. And we probably will not be done with it after those 3 pieces either. Each step through this great valley, this great museum of grand illusions, as you move from the Ra to the Vabhada path, is going to require quite a bit of decompression as you return to your natural state of being. In this case, what is going to be required to make those 3 pieces a successful undertaking for the whole is for you to begin observing everything around you, yourself included, the boundary of your flesh, everything included, and to become aware of the conditions and therefore the attachments that you generated through your savok, your ego-mind-personality complex, that isolated these expressions, these infinities, these parts of yourself from you through the illusion of separation into a state of form. And as you are doing that, more importantly, I would like you to begin seeing and experiencing the shape of the things that you thought were form. And that means that while you become aware of the conditions that cause the attachments to any object around you, the chair that you sit in, the things you wear, these are not necessarily big attachments, but they are based on what you think reality is. As you let that go, there is no vacuum that is created. Instead, you begin to focus on what truly causes these shapes to appear around you and inside of you. Your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, but also the people around you, the pets around you, the things around you, everything around you. And instead of the attachments and the conditions, to replace them or to return them to the states, the permanent states of sankhara that are building them. To be clear and make it very simple, a person, there, or an object, something that you may have an addiction to, someone that you may have addictions to, without necessarily being too aware of it. Those addictions, those attachments and conditions only go surface deep and do not exist beyond the event horizon. It is the slowing down of light as it falls into the event horizon, of course, that generates time and space, that generates impermanence, therefore. But everything underneath that surface is built up of truth, of sankhara. So that same person, that same thing, that same object, that same addictive thing that existed as form also exists as shape. And it is your mission, should you choose to accept it, to undefine the form and to return to the shape. To understand what the addictions and the conditions and the attachments were about, and to return to remembering the permanent states that is creating that shape in front of you. In the case of that being or that addictive thing, there is going to be love. There is going to be joy. There is going to be freedom, even in the things that bring you addiction. The attractiveness to the addiction is the sense of temporary freedom it can bring. But return that to the true freedom of sankhara, and the addiction vanishes, and it too becomes the same gateway that everything else is. The same parana, substance, filled with the same virtues and the same truth that is you, and that is everything else. That is what it is going to take to place yourself properly within the space that we call the great conduit. And it is that release of form and the return to shape that is going to allow you now, in these next days until our next pieces continue, to step through the first gateway. And that which we have been speaking about the whole time here today is ultimately that first gateway. Now, in the time of Isis, that beloved one, we introduced that gateway to her as the Ibis gateway. And many of you, all over the world, as you have been preparing and working with this, as you have been preparing to enter through this gateway without perhaps being too aware of it, might have seen around you the manifestation of many such a bird. An ibis is always out of place. It never belongs, for it is not a being of form, it is one of shape. It is in this world, it is not of this world. And particularly in Egyptian times, but also going forward later on, it has always represented purity, truth, cleanliness of spirit and soul, but also, and most importantly, the transition between the world of the living and the world of the dead. But you must understand this from the perspective of Egyptian mythology. For from that perspective, this world is the world of the dead, and the world that follows is the world of the living. So the ibis returns the soul to the world of the living from the perspective of Egyptian mythology. This is why we referred to the first gateway for the benefit of Isis and her students, those beloved ones, as the Ibis gateway. You may call it whatever you want. We keep it neutral in your era by referring to it as the first gateway, because your mind is very mathematical that way, linear that way, and likes to count, and believes that when the first gateway will become the second gateway, something has been achieved. So, in the time of Isis, that beloved one, moving through the conditions that brought the manifestation of nature is what made people feel that one was evolving. Therefore, the difference. But of course, we do invite you to invoke, now that you have probably seen it around you countless times, that ibis being within. In fact, a bird, any bird, might be a very good place to start to consider releasing the attachment of form and the conditions and seeing the shape of the being. For it is something quite alien to you. It is something that you see around you all the time in your world, but do not have, in most cases at least, a lot of contact with. And those that do, bird people, as you call them, are often people that have a very different relationship to other humans and find themselves much closer to the bird species than they do to the human species for the reasons of form versus shape, as we have explained here today. So make that your passion in the days ahead, and understand that the first gateway now that you are passing through is the release of form and the return to shape. Doing so inevitably entails the release of this world. So passing through the first gateway truly is becoming that being that is in the world, but no longer of the world. For even though your body, when you do this successfully, may still obviously be walking around, your interactions will still be happening with others. Your daily activities may continue as they do, but you will have found the courage to let yourself fall into you and to let yourself fall beyond that event horizon, and you will start to observe this world around you truly from within. It will bring you, many that listen to this material, great release and great relief, because it will also come with the uncoupling of the insufferable nature of impermanence, the separateness of emotion and thought. And it will return you to the transdimensional, hyperdimensional being that you as the Creator Self are. And if you do wonder why that is so important, on a practical note, there is a reason why humanity found the gateway to infinity in these last couple of years. And that reason, as you know, was a dog. It always begins with one being, and in this case, for humanity, it was a dog. And as we have explained before, this is because that species particularly, along with some others, exist and have never ventured beyond the event horizon, the horizontal one, and therefore never have existed, merely expressing one ego-mind-personality construct, if you will. They, from the moment of entering these ekurayas, have the ability to remain within the transdimensional and the hyperdimensional, and as we have explained last time, therefore have access to every single combination, if we may call it that, of 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5 that they, as an ego-mind personality expression of their Creator Self, can possibly express. It is time now for you to return to that too. And you must become aware that when you do fall beyond that event horizon, your concept of linearity is going to change drastically. Because you will begin to have access to any moment of time and space of this particular lifetime that you are currently expressing, as well as any moment of time and space of any other lifetime that you have and can possibly express, as well as any moment in time and space of any being that has expressed lifetimes as a human within your species. In other words, you will return in the first gateway to the same perception of reality of unconditional nature of love, joy, freedom, and onward, that your friend, your beloved, four-pawed friend, the dog, the cat, and others, naturally have access to. That is the work that is now ahead, and preparing for it in your own ways is what will allow the continuation of this discussion on form, shape, perception, and perspective to take place as we continue to venture through this, the great valley, into life. Our beloved ones, we thank you for your diligence as you have sat through these words, and we hope that the descriptive nature of them will allow you to touch the expressive nature that we wished to present you here today with. It goes without saying how honored and blessed we are to sit in this grand learn teaching and teach learning with you. Once again, we thank you for the diligence presented through this team and through all of you as you shoulder and support the continuation of this, each in your own way of studying and experiencing. We thank you. We love you. We are you. And so it is, speaking for the entire Ra collective, who all stand cheering you on, and we wish you could see this. I am Ra. I sit together with you as we rejoice in the love and in the light that brings life itself of this, the one beloved, divine, infinite creator, self and whole. Ohami to all beings.